Good evening. I'm Alan Lomax, and I chair the Leadership Council of the Suicide Prevention Alliance of Northern Virginia, or better known as SPAN. As many of you are aware, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and as the month ends, we have a wonderful presentation. I think that all of us will find exciting, and that is dealing with uncertainty and stress in changing times. And Nori, if you can go to the next slide, and hopefully the block will go
Yeah.
away. There we go. Just so you know, the Suicide Prevention Alliance of Northern Virginia is a regional coalition made up of the representatives from the Community Services Board from Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax Falls Church, Loudoun, and Prince William County, as well as community partners such as the Partnership for Health of Alexandria, and NAMI of Northern Virginia, as well as the American Federation on Suicide Prevention. And we're all working together to raise awareness and share resources to prevent suicide, such as tonight's webinar. Next slide, please. And tonight, our presenter is Dr. Robin Mellenbeck, who is director of George Mason University Center for Community Mental Health and professor, Department of Psychology at George Mason University. Dr. Mellenbeck is a clinical child and adolescent board certified psychologist who specializes in working with children with medical conditions. Her specialty extends to working with families of adolescents with and without medical issues, using a family systems approach to treatment. As I just mentioned, she's a professor of psychology at George Mason University and director of the Mason Center for Community Mental Health. She's also on the executive committee for the George Mason University Mental Health Task Force. Prior to coming to George Mason, she was a clinical associate professor at the Warren Alpert Medical School of Brown University. He worked at the Hasbro Children's Partial Hospital Program, where she served as director of training. Committed to the clinical science model, Dr. Mellenbeck engages in clinical work, teaching, and research with a multidisciplinary focus. She has trained medical students, psychology interns, and fellows, pediatricians, and psychology residents, and fellows and developmental behavioral health pediatricians. She completed her undergraduate training at the College of William & Mary and a doctoral training at the University of Memphis. She completed an internship at the University of California, San Diego Consortium, Children's Track, and her postdoctoral training at the Warren Alpert Medical School of Brown University. The two important other notes to know is that she has several publications and presented nationally and internationally on areas of working with children and adolescents with medical issues. And she is past president of the Society for Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics. We're most fortunate to have Dr. Mellenbeck join us tonight. And Robin, I will turn it over to you, and thank you.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. It's always kind of like, wow, what is actually, with hearing about yourself is just kind of like overwhelming sometimes. So I'm very happy to be here with everybody today to talk about this topic, even though in my intro, Alan really highlighted my work with kids and families who are dealing with medical issues. Since coming here to George Mason, I do a ton of teaching and training, and I'm thrilled to run our Center for Community Mental Health, which I always like to remind people is actually the main training clinic for doctoral students in clinical psych, but we also train counseling students and undergrads who are interested in behavioral health. And we provide sliding scale services to the community. So we're not the Mason's Counseling Center for their students. Some students find us, but we work with kids as young as age 5, all the way through the lifespan. We have special services for veterans. And our goal is to make it affordable and accessible. So again, I think, our center fits very nicely with the SPAN mission as well. But tonight we're going to talk about uncertainty and stress in changing times. And I always like to kind of show this slide. And yes, if there's a little bit more of the kid side, it is because that is where my heart is with teenagers and kids and families. But I think even the adults in the crowd can relate to this slide. Good morning, let the stress begin. So the first thing I actually would like you to do, and not in the chat, but in the Q&A, is just type in, and I don't know if you can do it anonymously, but your current stress level, scale of 1 to 10. 1 being the most laid back, relaxed you could even ever imagine. 10 indicating you're barely hanging in there by a thread. So I'm going to give everybody a minute to put in, and as I said, I think it's the Q&A section. So 5, 7, 8, 7, okay, 5. So we've got people at least, somebody's at a 2. Well, we'll take that, but looks like the majority of everybody is at, well, 1, 2, but at best a 5, and then all the way up to an 8 is what we're talking about. So hopefully some of what we talk about tonight will help with managing some of that stress. Lots of reasons for that stress. And tonight, though, we're going to really kind of focus a little bit on kind of news, current events, how that affects our stress level. And so take one more minute to type in, how did you get most of your news or information about current events when you were growing up? And how do you get that most of your news and current events these days? So again, take a minute, type in the Q&A. I figure I'm always dating myself when I think about getting my news and current events growing up, when we would sit down and watch the news once a day with my parents. So people are saying they get their news from other people, avoid all the news. Through historically growing up through the TV or newspaper, but now it's all social media. Previously nightly news like me. Now social media alerts from your phone, TV. And so, thinking about this, the fact that there used to be a one time, somebody just said we watched WTOP CBS and read the Washington Post or Washington Evening Star newspaper. And again, most of us do not sit down and watch a half an hour of the news at this point. Most of us get our information from social media, from alerts, occasionally from the newspaper. Okay. But even the newspaper is often online and it's updating, moment by moment. Okay. So a lot has changed in how people get the news. Used to also be that, again, if you're up in the middle of the night, you're not going to find a news channel. Now it's 24/7. You can get news, you can get information 24/7. You never get a break. Okay. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about, how we experience kind of current events. And I am going to stay very apolitical. I'm going to do my best. Then we're going to talk about its relation to stress, some stress management strategies, resilience, some tips to increase resilience, communication and media strategies for these uncertain times, and where to go if you need more resources. I did feel like in putting tonight's webinar together that I was kind of thinking I could have done separate talks on all of these topics. So my goal is to get through the information. We might go a little quick, but I really would love to have questions and discussion. at the end. So I want to make sure we leave time for that as well. Okay, so starting with current events, this is, I think everybody across the board would agree that there are tremendous changes, that there's a lot of uncertainty, um, that, I love this expression because that's sometimes how I just feel of, oh my gosh, what's next? And when there is uncertainty, that can cause feelings of fear, frustration, detachment, isolation, okay? And that often and can lead to relationship issues. Okay? And when we're talking about kids, they often mirror the adult emotions. So when we're talking about our own responses in times of uncertainty and not being able to predict things, we also want to remember that the kids around us and teenagers, are going to both mirror our emotions, but then potentially take it a step further, um, depending on a developmental level. So young kids, they're just going to look to their parents or the important adults in their life, their caregivers, for reassurance. Is everything going to be okay? They don't want to know, they don't need to know the nitty-gritty of what's going on. Preteens, though, are exploring and forming their own independent opinions. They're exploring media more. Most preteens at this point have cell phones and access to social media apps, to the internet, um, to TikTok. We'll talk more about some of those things. And so, again, they may look to their caregivers for some reassurance, but this is also a time where they may start to disagree with their parents or their caregivers just for the sake of it. Teens have the highest exposure to media, the highest intake of information, are more likely to lash out, not want reassurance, but basically want to come up with the solutions themselves. And again, you can imagine, depending what they find and where they find it, that's going to vastly influence kind of their response to any given situation. Adults do tend to take more control of their exposure to media, the type of media, the focus on the media. I think somebody put in that initial chat that, or the Q&A, that you don't look at the news, and that is a choice. And adults can take that choice, versus, okay, maybe my rule for myself is I look at my New York Times app once a day and I turn off my alerts. Okay? So again, there's different ways to grab the news, the current events, to be aware of what's going on. We also want to make sure everyone's aware. There are all kinds of responses. And the ones we're seeing a lot of, physical responses, people have loss of sleep, feeling jittery and on edge. We're seeing lots of stomach aches, headaches, and lower immunity to illness. And this is true in any time of uncertainty. That's not just true for the last 6 months, but any time of uncertainty. Emotional responses include irritability, anxiety, sadness, a lot of anxiety. Okay? I'll talk later that we run 2 emotional support lines, and we have seen tremendous spikes in the usage of those lines and the anxiety that people are reporting. And I just love this little cartoon, and that's why it's there. I'm so stressed out. What do I do? Well, brain says wallow in self-pity until you can wallow no more. And your little id, or your little devil guy, says ice cream until you can ice cream no more. So substitute your favorite food for chocolate. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about current events and the current uncertainty. Does it mean that current events cause the stress? And the answer is no. Stress is a part of life. Couple of things. We've been here in the DMV, back in the DMV, I should say, for 15 years now. I did grow up over the bridge on the Maryland side, but part of the DMV. And things have not changed as far as the idea of stress. You know, people are often proud of being stressed. You know, if you're not stressed, you're not working enough, you're not studying enough. We are seeing, though, and this I think really hit home during COVID, and afterwards, prolonged levels of stress that are significantly unhealthy. And that has gotten worse in the last several months. There are physiological changes that happen with stress, and there are many reasons for the increased stress. One of them, in this area in particular, is everybody knows somebody who has been affected by the federal layoffs, whether it's a family member, a friend, lots of anxiety, lots of stress, financial stress. So, you know, thinking about, yes, stress is part of life, but there are reasons why, and when lots of changes happen, lots of uncertainty, that the stress becomes prolonged. And stress feels not so great. You know, when we think about stress, we think about the fight or flight response. And back when our ancestors lived in caves and walked out of a cave and came face to face with a tiger, and your body did all of these things, you know, trembling, sweating, heart racing, breathless, jelly-like legs, wanting to running, that was an appropriate response. If you did not have that stress response, you were going to get eaten by the tiger. Today, we don't have a literal tiger in front of us, yet so many people are reporting all of these stress symptoms on a prolonged basis. And our bodies are not set up for that. I also I'll highlight the little mind thing up here, the mind racing. No, but, should, might, yes, bad, no, yes, maybe. You know, we get really caught up in our heads when that stress response hits, and we're not the best thinkers then. So again, decisions can be made that are actually not in your own best interest at that time. So a lot of what I was just talking about may sound a lot like anxiety. Stress and anxiety are definitely connected. You know, stress is that heightened physical state, and it can be positive or negative. It can be a life-saving fight or flight response. You know, when I think about a positive stress situation, think about going to an amusement park and getting on that roller coaster, and you have those physical symptoms of stress, you know, that your stomach starts to feel fluttery, you might flush, you might start trembling a little bit, but yet you're excited, not anxious per se. Maybe you're a little scared, you know, but that could be a positive. But it's a short-term response. The roller coaster goes for, if you're lucky, 60 seconds, and then it stops. And then 60 seconds later, as you're walking and you're laughing with, you know, with friends, you know, you go back to baseline. That's when we're talking stress. Having said that, as I mentioned, there is prolonged stress. And you know, that has again other physical consequences that are not helpful on your body. Now, where stress goes to anxiety is you have additional thoughts, you get caught up in your head that exacerbate the stress and anxiety. Instead of addressing whatever it is, if you start to become impaired in that and avoiding the situation. So you could be stressed at work, but it crosses over into anxiety when, okay, I can't even go into the office today because I know I'm going to mess up this project and I just can't face everybody. Okay. We've gone from just feeling stress to having anxiety. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to put questions in too as we're going along. So I did put together, some warning signs that stress is more than stress. Anytime you have excessive worry that interferes with functioning, the inability to control your worries, concentration, sleep. Sleep is a heck of a marker because if you're not sleeping, chances are you're not functioning as well as you could be in many areas. Irritability, you have a drop in work productivity, or for teens and kids, a drop in school grades. Attendance issues, again, school, job. We saw coming out of COVID that, it really was hard for kids to go back to school. And the attendance issues, still we're not back to currently, we're not back to pre-COVID levels. If you're starting to notice yourself withdrawing from friends, from your activities that you enjoyed, and we always take seriously any statements about not wanting to be alive, that's a severe, significant sign that stress is more than stress, that you need to get some help immediately. Okay, so what can we do about stress? And again, we're thinking about stress. Relaxation strategies are your friend. I love these different ones. And again, you can tell my kids focus, snake breathing, and I'm going to ask you all to do this along with me, is really just slowly breathing in through your mouth and then letting the air go out breathing in through your nose and letting the air come out slowly through your mouth. We call it snake breathing because you can make a little sound. So you breathe in through your nose, deep breath. Let it out through your mouth. And again, you don't have to make the snake sound, but if you're trying to get your kids to do it with you, it's a great way to engage them. And then you want to make each breath a little bit slower, each inhalation through your nose, each exhalation through your mouth. The other one I really love is what's called progressive muscle relaxation. This is a great one to do at night if you're having trouble falling asleep. And again, kids can do this part of it at school. The hand part, basically what you're doing for muscle relaxation is tightening the muscle and then holding it. And so for kids, I will say, okay, let's squeeze those lemons because we're going to make lemonade. And then you got to let the sugar kind of just drop into it, kind of relax your hands. A full progressive muscle relaxation includes going from your toes all the way up to your head. And there are plenty of options of how to do this. You can just look it up on Google and they will come up and you can pick one you like. Again, I like with kids to do animal muscle relaxation or making lemonade. Grounding is another thing. When our head is starting to spin, when we're getting really stressed, we tend to tighten up our muscles, our thoughts go elsewhere. And when you do some just basic grounding, that can really help bring you back to the present moment. And then you can refocus. So, using either worry stones. So if you have some kind of object that you can put in your hand. But the other one I use is just noticing your feet inside your shoes. Notice each individual toe. Notice how your heel feels. Notice where your shoes are touching your foot. It can be very helpful to bring you back to the present moment. I also recommend folks, and again, kids, teens, adults, make a toolbox, collect your favorite ideas and make them concrete. We all have stress. We all struggle with stress. And having literally a shoebox that you've decorated or a little decorative box to put some of these things together that you can go to. I know some adults I've worked with who get stressed driving in this area, and they keep a little toolbox in the car. You know, have a stress ball in it where you can just squeeze it. I'm a big fan of bubbles that you blow because, again, you can cause your body to relax blowing bubbles. A bottle of water, sometimes even just having, taking a moment to have a drink can help calm your body a little. Pictures of activities, pictures of family, friends, kind of, again, the idea being to ground you back into what's meaningful for you and what's important to you. Coping card with motivational or positive self-statements. And then, because everybody has their cell phone attached to you, be intentional about what your homepage looks like. What is it going to be on that homepage that will kind of help you decrease your stress response? You know, for me, I have it set to rotate through my pictures because I take pictures of my kids, my dogs, our cats, you know, and friends. And so, and trips, you know, things that kind of are meaningful to me, and they rotate. So I kind of, it's a quick way to ground myself. All right. Shifting a little bit. I like to just share this. This doesn't fit in tremendously here, but I like to share just a reminder that it's possible to be super, super stressed and be able to be calm. You can be smiling, you can be struggling. You can be an extrovert and feel alone. You can have trauma and still be very successful. You know, I just think so much of the time we think about all or nothing. We think about I'm either capable or I'm lost. And that's just not the case. All of us tend to have overlap. So I encourage you to think about that for yourself. Okay. Now we're shifting a little bit into resilience. What is it and how can we build it? So, resilience is defined by the American Psychological Association as the process and outcome of adapting to difficult life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility. And so, when we think about times of uncertainty, you know, the idea of resilience is really important, that mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility. If we're able to be flexible in times of upheaval, uncertainty, and changes, then we're able to continue to move forward, whatever that looks like for you. Okay? And based on your culture, your background, your ethnicity, it's going to look different for every single one of us. Flexibility muscle and resilience muscles can be built. Okay, so remembering that, again, it's not all or nothing. It's somewhat like you are going to the gym. The first time you go, you can lift 5 pounds, maybe. But if you go and you practice over and over, then you'll be lifting 25 pounds and then maybe 50 pounds. Okay, resilience is very similar, and using the skills for resilience are very similar. Resilience, when we think about media consumption, resilience can also help you evaluate before reacting to new information. It can help you recognize misinformation in some ways, but more importantly, increase your self-regulation skills. So it's very easy to constantly, again, that stress response, that fight or flight response, to react to the next thing that is thrown at you. Building some resilience can help you center yourself, kind of figure out how you're going to react and evaluate that information rather than just reacting. Okay? And so, as we talk more about resilience, this flexibility, this adaptation, it also can help you develop mindful media consumption habits. And we're going to talk about this a little about how do you want to limit your exposure? How do you choose reliable sources? And how do you discuss news with others? I think we all have people that we consider safe, that share our exact same views. And yet we also know that that's not necessarily going to help us move forward through these times of uncertainty, just staying in your own little bubble, as much as we want to. Okay, so skills, again, to increase that resilience muscle. You'll hear this towards the end. One of my favorites is gratitude. And this is really hard when, you feel like everything is falling apart and everything is changing and there's tons of uncertainty and stress. But there is actually a lot of research data to show that if you can come up with 2 to 3 things that you are grateful for each day for 2 weeks, your mood is going to be better. And if your mood is a little better, you're able to, again, think and make decisions intentionally rather than just reacting. Random acts of kindness. And again, none of this has to be big, but random acts of kindness helps you focus on others. And again, there's really good data to show that increases resilience when you're able to just make somebody else's day a little bit. Again, one of my favorite things to do on this one is just leave a little sticky note for someone and just say, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for, finishing that project so quickly. Or, sometimes for kids, it's a little note in the lunch, just wanted to let you know I love you. I mean, these are things that really have a big impact on you as well as the person you're doing it for. The 3 good things activity, again, identifying 3 good things that happened that day. And they could be small, that I didn't spill my coffee on me in the morning. That was good, depending on the day. Or I made myself get up and go to the gym. That's a good thing. Mindful breathing, I mentioned some of the relaxation strategies. There's quite a lot of work around just having a mindful breath and focusing on your breathing. Again, lots of resources for those. A body scan, particularly when we're stressed. This is a good one. When we get stressed, we tend to hunch our shoulders, we tend to tighten our muscles. And if you scan your body and identify where the stress is, and then intentionally release that stress and that tension, that can help build these resilience muscles. The PMR, progressive muscle relaxation, again, one of my favorites because you're physiologically affecting your body, and again, increases your resilience. Focusing on strengths and gifts. So many of us, and I think this is particularly true in the DMV area, are always comparing ourselves to other people, intentionally or unintentionally. But there's so much social comparison. If you're able to take a little time and acknowledge your own strengths, your own gifts, those of your friends, those are people around you, the strengths, again, you end up with a much more calm, positive experience, and it builds your resilience. Relationships, the opposite of isolation. And I do think in times of uncertainty, we do tend to go back towards isolation, and that's something we really want to fight against. The upside of stress, I always like this with resilience. In the athletic literature, they have what's called the inverted U. So the inverted U, where if you don't have any stress, you're not going to perform well. If you have too much stress, you're not going to perform well. The idea is kind of that nice middle, so there is a function for stress. The key is not having too much where it paralyzes you. Last, I always like to connect resilience with meaning. And what is the meaning in my day? What is something you've done that is connected with your values that has meaning for you. So, today when I'm working with kids in a diabetes clinic, what has meaning is helping one of the doctors understand the motivation behind maybe how a family is responding. And that had a lot of meaning. And so, thinking about that um, can really, again, help build my resilience. So when I say, what will you do? I really encourage you all to pick one thing from all of these options or the stress management options and commit to doing that this weekend. Okay, now we're going to shift a little bit again to talking about kind of, let's say, the last 6 to 8 months and thinking about the role of social media and media. And most parents, most adults did not grow up with 24/7 media, social media. And the range of options through these avenues is unlimited. It's 24/7. We have TikTok, YouTube, X, formerly Twitter. Facebook is for what I'm learning is for us older folks. But Snapchat's huge, but there's all kinds of other options, lots of ways to get your information or to connect with people or to get misinformation. And it's important to understand that this constant stream of information actually can cause physiological changes in the brain and almost like an addiction to really get very hooked on your devices because you got to get the next alert. You have to respond to that next text or that next snap right away. And we see this with the teenagers in particular, where there isn't often that ability to self-regulate. The rapid intake of information does contribute to feelings of confusion and overstimulation because, again, how do we know where that information is coming from? How do we trust it? And because it's always changing, it's hard to know what to believe. We also are living in a time of, really an all or nothing or us versus them mentality. And that's adding additional strain. Depending what you follow through your feed, it feeds you more of that to even help you become more one side or the other. There's very little meeting in the middle and talking. And we see that at the highest level of politics. We see that within families. We see that within friend groups. Um, it's really difficult in our current climate to not make all or nothing judgments. And then we have this whole idea of what is truth. There with all of the media, with all the social media, now with the advent of AI, artificial intelligence, it's really hard to spot a fake, really hard. And it's hard to know what you're seeing and what is true. So, what do we do about it? There are a few things. The first thing is being honest with yourself and your values. And this could be individually, this could be with your family. You really want to kind of be honest with yourself. Where are you at? What are your values? How am I going to live with those values? Communication, having ongoing communication with folks, building your resilience and self esteem, and then thinking about, do I want an exposure to a constant stream of information? Because we know we have data that shows that that's going to decrease your confidence in yourself, in your ability to make judgments, and your resilience. So, communication, I can't stress enough how much communicating in tough times is so important. And how do you do it? Because the emotional side gets brought in quickly. So the first thing to do, especially if you're going into a situation where you know it could be a tough conversation, is to check in with yourself. What are my thoughts? What are my emotions? How am I likely to respond? What am I worried about? Just to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, is this going to help me achieve whatever goal I have in this communication? Um, Setting aside a time to talk rather than waiting for others to come to you to actually initiate things can make a huge impact. Now, my absolute favorite places to have conversations with teens are in the car or while taking a walk. And that way you don't have to look at each other. We had a rule in our house when our teens were growing up that anyone who sat in the front seat could not be on their devices. And you end up having really interesting, thoughtful conversations when somebody is in the car sitting near you, but not on their device. Going for a walk is a great way. Again, you're not sitting and looking at each other. You're moving, you have something to do. Remind yourself too, and people you're talking to, it's okay not to have all the answers. Again, I feel like we need to defend our position, particularly around tough conversations. And it shows a lot of strength to say, I don't know. I'm surprised to hear you say that. Where did you get that information? Because I'm not aware of that. Just it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to normalize others' emotions and welcome that in conversation, even if you don't agree with their statements. And that's important because I think people feel that if they are saying, yes, I hear how upset you are, you're agreeing that they have that right to be upset. Okay. There's a big difference between normalizing others' statements, emotions, and agreeing with it. And it's okay to agree to disagree. I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A, so I'm keeping going, but feel free to stop, put questions in. All right, so media, building resilience, particularly with family members, I would say, but with friends, encourage open discussions about current events. Can't tell you how often we avoid them. I'm guilty of that. Things tend to get very emotional, and I don't like that. And it doesn't help us have those good open discussions if we avoid them. So encourage those open discussions. Teach and practice media evaluation skills. So, one of the fun things to do is play around a little bit with AI. Have two people put the same prompt into two different AIs, see what you get, and then fact check it, see if it's actually accurate. It gives you a sense of what is out there. And evaluating what you see and what the source is really important. I'm going to get a very different information from Fox News than MSNBC. Okay. I need to evaluate that, knowing kind of where they're coming from. Want to discuss strategies and come up with your own strategies to cope with the negative emotions and stress, similar to some of the things we suggested earlier. It's also really important, particularly for those of you who are caregivers, to model resilience and healthy media habits. If you go out to dinner, how often do you look around and see, 3 or 4 people all on their cell phones eating dinner out? Put the phones away, have dinner together, talk to each other. Integrate your own family values and rules into discussions around media and overexposure. So again, as a adolescent psychologist, I get asked a lot, should I let my teen have Snapchat? Should I let my teen do X? And part of the answer to that is, what are the family values? What's important to your family? Okay. And then how do you model that? And then how do you teach healthy habits? Because this stuff is here to stay. We're not going back to when you had a landline. Um, for those of you who know what that is, the telephone hooked to the house and you couldn't go walk around with a cell phone. We're not going back to that. So the question is, how do we help teach the healthy habits? Um, and then routines. So, for kids, not having the cell phone in their room at night when they sleep. For adults, putting your cell phone away so that you're not looking at it when you're laying in bed trying to fall asleep. That's a healthy habit. And so that's really important to think about. How many of you, and you don't have to answer this in the Q&A, but think, do I look through my New York Times or Washington Post or whatever newspaper alerts right before bed? And if so, does that make it even harder to fall asleep? Chances are it does. Okay, so this is a little bit redundant, but it really is important to talk to kids about mindfulness and its application to media habits, being intentional with how you use social media, how you use AI, setting boundaries for yourself and for any kids and teens in the family. But I encourage for yourself too. Focus on what are the sources of information. Make sure you're aware of where it's coming from. It, fact check it, see as if it's true. You want to connect with community, both to model well-being, to help your kids stay connected. Think about who is in your community. Is it a religious organization? Is it an extended family? Is it, certain friends? Is it a group at the gym? You want to make sure you're staying connected with community and just remind yourself that mindful consumption of media does reduce stress, increases focus, and it gives you a better understanding of that media safety. Okay. I think we touched on most of these. This is again another way to think about media safety and well-being. Talk. How do you find credible sources? How do you recognize experts? And this is really, really tough when we're in a time of uncertainty where basically experts are being fired. So thinking about, how do you find those credible sources? How do you learn to spot fake images or misleading content? And this is really hard now. Test it. See if you Google, you know, fake pictures and real pictures and put them side to side. They're hard to tell. They're really hard to tell. Privacy and security, you know, especially for our kids, they don't realize how little privacy and security they have. And I think it's important for adults to realize as well, anything that goes through your cell phone, just make sure, you're okay with somebody knowing it or somebody reading it or somebody seeing it. A locked cell phone gives us a misguided sense of security. Anything that's out there on a computer, on a cell phone, if you have an Amazon or an Alexa, they're, it's not private. And just to be aware of that. And then you make choices about that. Limits on screen time. I've said that over and over. And again, that's for adults too. Limits. And then where do you go for help if you or your kids see uncomfortable or harmful content? Again, there's that sense of, I'm going to isolate, I'm going to hold it in, and that's not going to help. That's going to increase stress, decrease resilience, and literally physically make you sick. So you want to be very upfront about, okay, if you see something that's uncomfortable, disturbing, come to me. You're not going to be in trouble. And as an adult, who do you talk to about that? And think about the family members, think about friends who are safe that you can continue to check in with so that, again, you're not by yourself. All right, so when do you need more help? All right. If you have noticeable shifts in mood, more worry, anxiety, sadness, especially after kind of being on a screen, concentration problems, sleep problems, irritability, drop in grades or work performance, poor school job attendance. Sound familiar? This is what we started with. Withdrawal from friends' activities. Consider seeking out more help. Okay. And where do you get that help? I mentioned that our center does connect to the community, and we run 2 emotional support lines that are free, anonymous, and confidential. One in English, one in Spanish, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay, so if you're not sure, give a call and just talk to somebody. They'll be able to talk you through whatever you're going through, provide some support, and help you decide if you want or need more help. Okay? If you do, there's plenty of places to get more help. If you are seeking therapy, I really encourage you to think about cognitive behavioral treatment, which is a skills-based approach to help address the cycles of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. We offer at our center in-person and virtual services. Again, one after the emotional support lines, there's a second step that is just 3 virtual coping skills sessions. Again, you're not going to get into lots of background, but they do give you some skills to cope. Again, really inexpensive or free. We turn no one away due to finances. The Women's Center in Vienna is another organization that also is very committed to making sure finances are not a barrier to treatment. And then I often use Psychology Today Find a Therapist. You can put in your insurance, you can put in the type of therapy you're looking for, and it gives you some suggestions. I am going to make a plug. We are getting ready to run a teen social anxiety group. It's a wonderful skills-based group. So if you know of or have teenagers 13 through 17 who struggle with some of their social skills, maybe are more isolative, this is a great group. And again, the growth we see over 8 weeks in these teens is phenomenal when they realize they're not the only ones struggling with this. This is just, again, some additional resources on the Center for Digital Thriving is one of my favorite sources for dealing with social media and media. But you have the American Psychological Association. There's specific things. The Berkeley, the Greater Good at Berkeley is one of my most wonderful one of the most wonderful places to talk about and get insights on gratitude practices, building resilience. I really love that. And then Parents Guide to Helping Kids Accept Change and Tolerate Uncertainty. Even though it's the kids' parents guide, it's very applicable to ourselves as well. And I just want to highlight there's no relationship. These are just some of my personal favorites. And I'm going to leave you with my favorite coping, as no surprise that gratitude is really important to me, and it leads to all of these things: empathy, respect, grace, forgiveness, kindness. And then 2 of the groups I follow on Instagram myself is Mindful Mellows and Positively Present. And just this is a nice reminder that just one kind word can change someone's entire day. We don't know what people are going through, what stress, what uncertainty. And, just it doesn't cost anything to be kind. And you never know the impact you're having. So that's it for me. I'm happy to take questions. However you want to do this, Noreen and Alan, because I didn't see questions in the Q&A, but I am absolutely happy to take questions or discuss.
Yeah, thank you, Robin, very much. And we have a nice small group, so we are going to open it up for people to jump in and ask questions.
Okay.
I'm off mute. I will go ahead and start the questioning, kind of get it going. And one of the things I found interesting was, how do you actually build? I know you talked about it's like going to the gym, but how do you build flexibility muscles? So many of us sometimes we feel we're inflexible about a lot of things, and how do you
Yep.
build that flexibility in?
So, the psychological flexibility is what we call it. And building that flexibility in is you practice taking different perspectives. And again, some of those gratitude practices, the kindness practices, the focusing on a couple of good things, believe it or not, that increases your psychological flexibility. Because if we have increased empathy, if we have increased gratitude, it increases the ability to maybe see something from another perspective. So it does have kind of those indirect effects.
Thank you. Yeah, I've heard before about the importance of gratitude, and it's I think sometimes it's difficult when you get everything hitting you
Yes.
to step back and think about gratitude. So is there some sort of technique or something that somebody can do in order to say, okay, wait a minute, I need to think about what I'm grateful for, not everything that's bothering me right at this moment.
Right. I really encourage people to do a gratitude journal and to take, 2 minutes once a day and to write down 3 things you're grateful for. And sometimes it's the same thing over and over. Okay, I got out of bed today. That's something I'm grateful for. I was able to eat what I wanted today. So again, sometimes it's going back to some very basics. And we find this is helpful across cultures and across socioeconomic status. In fact, even folks who struggle the most purely like on living and food and housing, those who are able to do this practice are able to develop more resilience and get themselves out of situations quicker. So it's really interesting. But yeah, sometimes it's going back to the littlest things, and again, our goal is to make sure everybody's got your basic needs met. But those who have this practice are able to get those needs met quicker somehow.
Okay. Thank you. Are there other questions from people? This is your perfect opportunity to jump in and ask questions.
I find myself in an instructive mode or position, working and mentoring with young people 17 to 22.
Okay.
And we're trying to help them get their feet squared away and prepare them for the workforce.
Yep.
And I'm not sure what hints I should look for in identifying individuals as people who are at high risk due to the stresses around them. I find myself in position of conducting a class for 2 hours and having kids perform work functions and coaching them. And I find that most of the kids that we work with listen, pay attention, and try. There are some who find that the skills we're trying to teach them are not what they want to learn. So
right.
Those we can pick out. Those are easy to find. And then we can chat with them to find out, maybe, you need to go over here and get a different skill or different environment.
Yeah. I mean, I would think about are there one or two things, one or two messages around well-being that you can just, infuse into your class? And it could be that everybody starts the beginning of class with a couple of deep breaths, very slow, but it sends a message that we're going to kind of focus on what we're doing here. We're going to kind of relax. And then you can see who can't do that. Also just putting in, hey, a very direct statement of, hey, we know there's a ton of stress. And so we encourage you to think about sharing what's the hardest thing for you at some point, or here are the places where you can share that if you ever want to. Ellen is aware, I walk around with those emotional support line cards and leave them in bathrooms often. So that way, again, it just becomes a little more normalized and there's a place to go. But I do think instructors are in a unique position to be able to just kind of give that message of, yeah, life is tough. And, we're here for you in lots of different ways. And, let's
Well,
take it.
that's one of the primary things that we do try to do.
Yeah.
I always feel our goal is to help build confidence and self-confidence. Give them a skill that they know they can perform.
Yep.
And to let them know that when they're in the walls of this building or in this environment, they're safe.
Yeah, that's great.
No one's going to pick on them for being behind or slipping, or we will coach you. And that's our attitude.
Yeah, that's great.
But I still feel that, every now and then there's somebody who is at a higher risk because he can't tolerate and doesn't have the resilience and might be at risk, more risk than I can identify.
Yeah. And again, if they're willing to kind of acknowledge that life stress, even seeing who's your support outside of this wall, outside of this building, who are the supports, and encouraging them to connect with those supports. And again, for some of our youth, young adults, it is a religious organization. For some, it's a club. For some, it's a sport. But where do they have that other connection? Is it a grandparent? Is it a cousin? That's another way to kind of think about if this person, I'm not the one deciding if this person is at really high risk. However, the message is this is a safe place. You can share things, and we're going to try to get you support at whatever level you need it.
Those are good thoughts. I'll ask some of those questions of a couple of the individuals to make sure they do have a support system someplace.
Yep. And then if they don't, then that's an intervention in itself. It's just trying to see if there's, how we can help build that community.
Right. Well, we do. Sometimes we get a little deeper than we want to, because we end up being that person because they don't have somewhere else. And for the period of time that they're with us, we try.
Yep. Great. Well, keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Other questions? Okay. Robin, one of the things that you didn't mention, you sort of mentioned it, but you didn't. But as far as what are the benefits of reducing stress by just taking walks?
Yes, great point, Alan. Taking walks and being out in nature actually are actually high stress reducers. So though that's wonderful. And if you can take a walk with somebody, out in nature.
Hmm.
You're hitting the community, you're hitting the social support, you're getting some nature, you're breathing, you're getting your body relaxed. Kind of like win-win overall.
So get a walk buddy.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I think there's one of our charges for tonight is find a walk buddy and go for a walk.
Yep.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. We'll go. We still have Robin. I want to thank you for your wonderful presentation, and
Thank you for having me.
And I am grateful for your involvement and support with SPAN and your commitment to us. And I'm also grateful for the Center for Community Mental Health out at George Mason University because you guys are doing wonderful things out there for our community.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Of course. Noreen, would you mind bringing up my closing? I just want to identify for everybody. So Suicide Prevention Alliance of Northern Virginia, we have a suicide prevention campaign, which is Ask Talk Connect. I hope you will visit our website to learn more, but it's really about asking direct questions to people who are in crisis about what are they thinking, how you can help, and questions about gentle mental health regarding about what's going on in the community. Second part is talk to a person in crisis and follow up with them once they're safe, and talk openly about the mental health and suicide prevention in your community and what resources exist. And finally, the third part is connect somebody in crisis to 988 to help them find that support, that trained counselor, and also, call the a central support line out at George Mason is another opportunity as well. And the connection also involves connecting individuals with the training resources that are in all 5 jurisdictions. Mental health first aid is one of the big ones that is really helpful, and there's other trainings that exist out there. So I hope you will get involved in those and learn how to have empathetic conversations. And if you want to contact us, you can send us an email at suicidepreventionnva@fairfaxcounty.gov. And then, of course, our suicide prevention website, where we have a lot of information up there, and including tonight's presentation will be on there. So hopefully you will share tonight's presentation with everybody. I appreciate all of you joining us tonight in this important conversation. I want to thank the behind the scenes person, Noreen Buttar, who is a team leader for a youth development team in our Department of Community Human Services in the city of Alexandria. She made sure that everything was working technically for all of us and that we had everything going well. So thank you, Noreen. And remember to say one kind word to somebody over the next few days. Make their life a little better and make your life a little bit better. So thank you all for joining us. And I appreciate all of you spending part of your Thursday evening with us. So good night.
Good night, Alan. Good night, Robin.